Hi, today I'm going to talk about anti-dilution provisions in investor transactions involving emerging technology companies. Before we get into the details about anti-dilution provisions, it's important to understand what an anti-dilution provision is. Generally speaking, anti-dilution provisions provide some level of downward price adjustment in the event that the company sells securities at a lower price than that paid by those holding the anti-dilution provision rights. There are two main types of anti-dilution provisions: full ratchet and weighted average. Let's start with a full ratchet, which is the easiest to understand. In the event of a sale of securities at a lower price, which is often referred to as a down round, the investors with full ratchet anti-dilution protection receive the same price for the securities issued in the down round. For example, suppose securities with full ratchet protection are sold at $1 per share, and the company subsequently sells securities at 50 cents per share. The investors with the full ratchet protection basically get a price adjustment to get the benefit of the 50-cent price, effectively doubling the number of shares that they previously held. The end result is that the full ratchet anti-dilution protection is very protective of the investor interests. Thankfully, currently it's not used very often. The second form of anti-dilution protection is weighted average. In essence, with weighted average anti-dilution protection, the sale price of the securities as well as the number of shares sold are taken into account in the formula in determining the appropriate price adjustment. So, for example, in the event that the company sells or issues securities with the weighted average protection at $1 per share and the company subsequently issues shares at 50 cents per share, the size of the adjustment will be dependent upon the number of shares actually sold at that 50 cent per share price. The adjustment will be very modest in the event that only one share is sold, whereas there will be a more significant adjustment if 1 million shares are sold at that 50 cent per share price. There are two flavors of weighted average anti-dilution protection: a narrow base weighted average and a broad base weighted average. In essence, the difference between the two is that in the broad-based weighted average formula, the entire amount of common stock outstanding on an as-converted basis is taken into account with the adjustment being made, whereas in a narrow-based weighted average, a smaller number of shares are taken into account. It is generally more company-friendly to have a broad-based weighted average provision in that the net impact is that there is typically a larger downward adjustment in a down round for a narrow base weighted average adjustment as compared to a broad base weighted average adjustment. The broad base weighted average structure is by far the most common form of anti-dilution protection used in investor transactions involving privately held emerging technology companies. An important element in negotiating anti-dilution protection are the exclusions or carve-outs from the types of issuances by the company that can cause an adjustment in the price of earlier issuances. Some of the exceptions are virtually boilerplate, while others can be negotiated in protecting the company's ability to issue shares at a lower price without the necessity of creating pricing adjustments to the earlier issuance of shares. So what are the takeaways with regard to the anti-dilution protection provisions? 1. Anti-dilution provisions are rights in which the company provides some level of price adjustment to the holders of the rights in the event that the company sells security at a lower price. 2. The two common types of anti-dilution provisions are full ratchet and weighted average. The weighted average comes in two variations: narrow base weighted average and broad base weighted average. And 3. It's important to consider the exceptions or carve-outs for anti-dilution adjustments when negotiating anti-dilution provisions. I hope this overview of anti-dilution provisions has been helpful. If you have any questions, let us know. Thanks.